Hello everyone, I'm a doctor, and I've been in this profession for over 40 years. Today I'm not here to talk about medicine or treatments. I want to speak to you simply and personally about something that stayed with me through all these years. Something I've quietly carried with me until enough people began asking me the same question. They asked, "Doctor, after witnessing so many deaths, are you afraid of dying?" And I think maybe it's time I gave an honest answer. Not just an explanation, but a reflection, a glimpse into what I've seen and felt in the quiet, sacred moments when life comes to an end, and sometimes when something else begins. If you have a moment, I'd like to share a story with you. A story about why I'm not afraid of death and why after all these years, I believe it's not the end. I can't give you a scientific definition, and I won't pretend to speak from a particular religion or doctrine. What I'm sharing with you doesn't come from textbooks, nor does it follow a neat set of rules. It comes from where I've spent most of my life, beside hospital beds, in quiet rooms, in the last moments of a person's life. Over the years, I've learned that there are truths we don't always find in lectures or research papers. Some truths come in a whisper, in a stillness, in the way a room feels when someone takes their last breath. I've been there for those moments hundreds of times, and each time, no matter who the person was, how old they were, or how they lived, I've felt something I can't quite explain. It's not dramatic. There are no flashing lights or divine voices. It's much softer than that. But it's there, a quiet, steady feeling that the person in front of me isn't disappearing. They're not vanishing into some cold unknown. They're going somewhere that feels familiar. It's hard to describe that feeling, but if I had to try, I'd say it feels like they're going home. Not in the physical sense, not to a house or a place with an address, but to something deeper, a kind of home the soul remembers. Even if we in this life no longer do, the atmosphere in the room changes. There's a stillness, yes, but also a warmth. Sometimes I find myself taking a deep breath, not out of stress, but out of something that feels like relief. Like whoever was lying there has finally made it back to where they were always meant to be. I know this may sound strange. I know some may call it sentimental or even wishful thinking. And I don't mind that. I've spent too many years trying to explain away things I knew were real just because they didn't fit neatly into what could be proven. Now, I trust what I feel. What I've seen, and what I've felt, time and time again, is that death doesn't feel like the end. It feels like a return to something we all came from, something we've all been missing, even if we don't realize it. And maybe that's why I'm not afraid, because when I look at death now, I don't see a void. I don't see loss in the way I used to. I see someone finally going home. There are moments, and they don't happen every day, but when they do, I feel them in my very core. When I sit beside a dying patient, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, my heart feels calm. Not because I'm detached, not because I've grown used to the sight of death, quite the opposite. After all these years, I've never grown numb to the ending of a life. But in certain moments, there is a stillness that comes over me, a kind of reverence. It's as if the air itself becomes heavier, more meaningful, as though something invisible but profoundly real is present in the room. I've tried to put it into words, but words often fall short. The best way I can describe it is this. I feel as though I'm standing on the edge of something vast and ancient, something far older than any of us and far wiser than any teaching I've received. It's not frightening, it's humbling. It reminds me that no matter how much science we practice, no matter how much control we think we have over life and death, there is something greater quietly unfolding just beyond our reach. And in those final breaths, when the body lets go, when the struggle eases, I sometimes sense that what we call dying is more of a return than a departure. What makes this even more remarkable is that I've felt an almost identical sensation during the earliest moments of life. When I've helped bring a child into the world, when the room is filled with that raw, breathless anticipation, and then suddenly a baby cries out for the first time, there is a ripple that moves through everyone present. People may call it joy or relief, but for me it's something else entirely. It feels sacred, not just because a new life has begun, but because something beyond life has just passed through the room. There's something in the eyes of a newborn, a kind of depth that shouldn't belong to someone who's just arrived. They haven't spoken a word, haven't taken in the world, and yet there's a knowing in them, a quiet awareness that suggests they came from somewhere we've forgotten. I don't mean that in a romantic or poetic way. I mean it in a very real, visceral sense. There have been times when I've held a newborn and felt the same silent awe that I've felt sitting beside someone who is passing, as if these two souls, one arriving and one departing, are both brushing up against the same invisible boundary, a threshold. And the more I reflect on it, the more I've come to believe that birth and death aren't opposite events. They are mirror images, not the beginning and the end, but two turns in the same great spiral. In both there is a crossing. In both there is a letting go of one form and a movement into something else. And maybe, just maybe, both birth and death are moments when we are closest to that original place, that home, the one we came from, the one we'll return to. There's a softness in that idea that comforts me, a tenderness that reminds me even in the hardest days that life isn't a straight line from start to finish. It's more like a circle, vast, mysterious, and gently familiar. And if that's true, then perhaps none of us are ever really lost. We're just on our way home, in our own time. There was a time, one that has stayed with me more vividly than most, when I had just said goodbye to a patient I'd cared for over many weeks. He wasn't just another chart or another diagnosis. He had become familiar to me in that quiet, unspoken way that sometimes happens between a doctor and a patient, when trust is built not through dramatic conversations, but through presence, through small gestures, through simply showing up day after day. That afternoon, after sitting with him in his final hours, I walked back to my car in silence. I remember the light soft, the kind that comes just before sunset, and the way the air felt unusually still. I sat down in the driver's seat, but I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let myself take a moment. In my mind, I said my last goodbye, just a quiet thought, something like, "You did well. You can rest now." And then something happened. It wasn't a vision, and I don't claim to have heard a voice in the way people often expect, but there was a sudden feeling, like a wave of warmth rising up from somewhere deeper than I can explain. And with it came a thought. Not my own, but as if someone, or something, had whispered it directly into the quiet space of my mind. If I had known it would feel like this, I wouldn't have been so afraid. I remember smiling through tears because it was exactly what he would have said. The tone, the words, the subtle humor behind the fear. He had been anxious in the last days, not about pain, but about the unknown, about where he was going. He used to ask me quietly, "Doc, what do you think it's like?" And I'd always answer with care, never promising more than I knew. But in that moment, alone in my car, it was as if he had sent back the answer himself. What I felt in those few minutes wasn't grief, though of course I missed him. It was something else entirely. It was lightness, peace, a sense of return. I can't tell you whether it was real in any measurable sense. I don't need to. All I know is how it felt, and it felt true. It felt like grace. And what struck me most was how familiar that feeling was. I'd felt it before, when watching a patient breathe their last in silence, when witnessing a baby emerge into the world, eyes blinking into the light, when sitting in meditation, or even in moments of quiet prayer I never shared with anyone. It's always the same thread, subtle but unmistakable, a sense of presence, of love, of home. That experience, among others, is why I no longer see death as darkness. I don't view it as a cliff or a fall or an ending. I see it more like crossing a threshold, one that leads us not into the void, but into something profoundly welcoming, something we knew once but have forgotten. And perhaps in those rare moments we're given glimpses, just enough to remind us that what waits for us on the other side is not something to dread, but something in the deepest part of ourselves we've been homesick for all along. I won't pretend to know exactly what happens after we die. I've never claimed to hold the answers to the questions that have stirred in the hearts of human beings for as long as we've existed. I don't know whether we keep our memories, whether we recognize the people we loved, or whether we take on any shape or form at all. I don't know if time exists there, or if it disappears altogether, if there's light, or if it's something far beyond what our senses can grasp. What I do know, or rather, what I've come to believe through years of quiet witnessing, is that wherever it is we go, it doesn't feel foreign. It doesn't feel like a destination we must earn our way into. It feels familiar, like something we've known before. That's the part I keep coming back to again and again. It doesn't feel like a place we're meant to reach through some checklist of worthiness or belief. It feels like a place we came from, a place that has always been waiting. And the way people leave this world, the calm that sometimes comes over them, the sense of release, of return, it tells me we're not breaking into something new, but gently stepping back into something that was always ours. I've sat beside patients who were terrified in the beginning, fearful not just of pain or loss, but of disappearing, of the unknown. And yet, in their final hours, many of them softened, not because someone gave them the perfect words or because they suddenly understood everything, but because something within them recognized where they were going. It was as if their bodies were fading, but their being was remembering, and what they were remembering was home. That's why I no longer think of the afterlife, if you want to call it that, as a destination to be granted or denied. It isn't a gate to pass through or a prize to be earned. I think it's a return, a quiet return to a place we all once knew, even if we've forgotten it here. And maybe that's why, when the moment comes, when my time comes, I believe I won't be afraid, not because I've figured it all out, but because I've seen enough to trust that what waits beyond isn't a void or a punishment. It's a welcome, a gentle unfolding, a kind of homecoming. Whether you believe any of this or not, that's entirely up to you. And truthfully, it doesn't change what I've seen or what I've come to feel deep in my bones. Belief, as I've come to understand it, is not a prerequisite. It's not a ticket you hand over at the gate. Some of the most peaceful passings I've ever witnessed came from people who weren't sure what they believed. Some were spiritual, some were skeptical, some had no words at all for the mystery ahead. And yet, when their final moment came, there was no fear, no struggle, only stillness, only peace. That taught me something important, that whatever lies beyond this life doesn't seem to care whether or not we've named it. I'm not sharing this to convince anyone of anything. I've lived long enough to know that belief forced is belief that never roots. What I hope to offer instead is a possibility, one that might bring comfort, especially to those who carry a quiet fear in their hearts. If you are someone who worries about death, not just the act of dying, but the what comes hereafter, I want to tell you from a place of deep experience and sincerity, it may not be what you think. It may not be cold or silent or empty. It may not be the end of you. What I've seen, what I've felt, suggests something softer, something kinder. In the final hours, when everything else falls away, there's often a shift that words can't quite contain. I've seen eyes grow calm, faces relax into something close to wonder. I've sat in rooms where the air itself seemed to hum with presence, not absence. And in those moments, I don't feel despair. I don't feel loss. I feel something else entirely, something like reverence, something like return. So perhaps death isn't the fearful final stop we've come to imagine. Perhaps it's not a breaking but a crossing, not an erasure but a remembering. Maybe it's a gentle door, opening into a space we've always known but long forgotten. A place that has no need for credentials or belief or perfection. A place that receives us as we are, tired or curious or afraid, and offers us rest, offers us home. And if that's even halfway true, even just a sliver of truth, then maybe we don't have to fear it as much as we do. Maybe when our time comes, we'll recognize the feeling, and instead of clinging to this life with desperation, we'll step into the next with something like peace, something like trust. Maybe in that moment, we won't feel like we're leaving. Maybe we'll feel like we're finally going back. And if that's true, even if just a part of it is true, then I think when my own time comes, I won't resist. I won't cling. I won't be looking back with fear or regret. I imagine I'll take a breath, maybe one last slow exhale, and simply let go, not as a surrender, but as a release. A return. I've thought about that moment more than I used to admit, not in a morbid way, but in a quiet, reflective one. The way you think about an old song you haven't heard in years, but still somehow remember every note. I think about what it might feel like to close my eyes for the last time, and instead of darkness feel familiarity, recognition, peace. Not an ending, but a soft arrival. I hope in that moment I'll smile. Not because I know what's coming next, but because I'll feel it, the same way I felt it in the stillness beside a patient's final breath, or in the quiet wonder of holding a newborn child. I hope the fear will have long faded, replaced by something gentler, a kind of inner warmth that tells me, you're safe now, you're home. And maybe, just maybe, there will be a sense of reunion, not just with people I've loved and lost, but with something older, deeper, the very essence of who I am beneath all the years, the roles, the names. A return to the beginning, to the source, to whatever place has been calling softly to all of us, all along. So when that time comes, I don't think I'll fight it. I think I'll welcome it, with gratitude, with softness, with the same reverence I've held for every soul I've had the honor of guiding in their final moments. And if I'm lucky, if what I've sensed all these years is even close to the truth, then yes, I'll go with a smile, because I'll know, after everything, I'm finally going home. So if you've stayed with me until now, through all these quiet reflections, through the weight of life and the mystery of death, I want to thank you, not just for listening, but for being open to a conversation that so many of us avoid. We tuck it away in the back of our minds, hoping we won't have to face it for a long time. But the truth is, death isn't separate from life. It walks alongside us every step of the way. And perhaps the more we allow ourselves to speak about it gently, honestly, the less power it holds to frighten us. I didn't come here to give you answers. I don't have any grand revelations or promises. I've lived long enough to know that certainty is a fragile thing, and life doesn't always fit into neat, explainable boxes. What I do have is experience. Decades of sitting beside people at both the beginning and the end of life. Decades of noticing what words cannot always capture. The subtle shifts in energy, the moments of unexpected peace, the presence that seems to fill a room when someone takes their final breath. That's what I carry with me. That's what has shaped how I see death, not as an enemy, but as a part of the journey, a chapter, a homecoming. And if there's one thing I hope you'll carry with you after hearing all this, it's the idea that maybe death doesn't have to be something we brace ourselves against. Maybe it's not the void we imagine, not the terrifying unknown we've been taught to fear. Maybe it's not an ending at all, but a kind of remembering, a return to something we once knew, even if we've long forgotten it. Because when I look back on the countless lives I've been honored to witness, in birth, in aging, in passing, there's a pattern, a rhythm, a softness that repeats itself. It's there in the eyes of a newborn, and it's there in the last breath of someone who has finally stopped fighting. It's the same feeling, quiet, full, and somehow deeply familiar, as if life is a great arc, and we are all just making our way around the curve, only to find that the end looks a lot like the beginning. So when the time comes, for me, for you, for all of us, I hope it doesn't feel like a loss. I hope it feels like a gentle release, like falling into a deep, comforting sleep. I hope it feels like warmth, like peace, like home. And perhaps in that final moment, we won't feel like we're leaving anything behind. Perhaps we'll feel something even more beautiful, like we're finally returning to where we've always belonged.